Shalom.
Shalom.
Everybody should know my name by now. I'm Burl. I'm here because Josh isn't. He's out fishing.
Very good.
He called me on Tuesday and he made me worry about this all week. Usually he calls on Friday. Once in a while it happens Saturday morning. And I sort of like it that way because then I don't worry and my D's don't get anxious to knock back and forth. It is a very special day today.
Yeah.
It's a day that God has created.
Amen.
And He's given it to every one of us. And I remind you that we're not guaranteed tomorrow, but He's given this day to us so that we need to take care of it and use it wisely. And using it wisely on His day means we're supposed to rest in Him. Our thoughts are supposed to be on Him and what He has done. So before I say too much more, let's go to the Father. Blessed are you, Father, our God in heaven, King of the universe, who has created everything beautiful and it's very good. We thank you for the expectation of rain. It's supposed to happen this week. It may not here, but it's going to rain someplace for sure. But that won't make us sad because the world does need rain, just like the world needs your word. And that's what we're going to look at today. And I thank you for it in Jesus' precious name, Yeshua the Messiah. Thank you, Father. We bless you this day. Amen.
Amen. Do the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu
the universe. Adonai, our God, please make pleasant the words of your Torah in our mouths and in the mouths of your people Israel. And may we and our descendants and the descendants of your people, the house of Israel, be perceivers of your name and students of your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to the people of Israel. And when us Caucasians, when us Gentiles believe in Yeshua, we become part of the house of Israel, which is spectacular. We're grafted in. We have the same privileges and the same benefits and the same blessings that His chosen people have. So we're chosen too. Now, I'd like to start off with a couple comments, if I may. I'm sitting up here scared to death. I'll tell you why. I've got hearing aids hanging in my ears. And I've got glasses hanging on my ears. And I've got this mouthpiece hanging on my ears. So I'm pretty well wired up, if you want to put it that way. Almost a mechanical person. Something to help me see, something to help me hear, and something to help me talk. So I guess I better say a little something. And what I would like to do is I'd like to talk about what I would have named and what I'm going to name this class when I teach it tomorrow. I've got a couple of choices. I'll give you the choices that I was thinking about. I would entitle it, Who's in Charge? And that's a pretty easy one to answer, isn't it? The Father's in charge. Then I might entitle it, Support Your Local Shepherd. And I'm not too sure that's understandable because it doesn't sound like anybody supporting the local shepherd. Then I thought about this. Who is Korah? And that's an awfully good question. So I'd like to talk about Korah for just a minute. Korah was a Levite. He was chosen to do be participation in a special thing, the transportation of the wilderness tabernacle. He and others were set apart from the rest of the children of Israel to do a specific job with respect to the wilderness tabernacle. In other words, he was working for the Father. A very special job. Not all of us are set apart to work for the Father, but he was, along with some others. He was somewhere between 30 and 50 years old, because those are the ones that were chosen to move the tabernacle. Every Levite that was chosen was 30 to 50 years old. So he was elderly, if let's put it that way to be nice. He was elderly. Where was he? What was he doing when the Father became very upset with Miriam and Aaron, when Miriam made some comments that were true against Aaron? Was he there or was he not there? Was he paying attention or was he asleep? Because he could have seen how that affected the Father and how he responded and punished her. Admittedly, it was only for 7 days, but I think she got the message. I don't think he did. I wonder, did he hear it when the Father says, how could you possibly come against my servant? He's mine, speaking of Moses. So, how could Korah come against God's servants? Not just one, but both of them. Now, the first verse in our reading is a little bit deceptive, I think, because if you read other places in the Bible, the rebellion is called Korah's rebellion. Jude, verse 11, I think, says it was Korah's rebellion. He was the one that instigated it. In other words, he was the firebrand that started it. And from him it spread to other people because they lived in proximity to him. He must have been an awful sweet talker to convince people to go against Moses and Aaron. So, let's hear how he fared. So maybe my idea of who's in charge didn't apply to him. He doesn't understand that. It gives us a picture of who is not in charge, and it gives us a picture of someone who's in charge who's been told to be in charge, and it gives us a picture of who actually is in charge. So, sir, would you read starting chapter 16, verse 1, please? There's some things that crossed my mind. Going back to almost the first verse. Well, maybe I should start off this way. What was the sin of Korah?
Arrogance.
Rebellion.
He wanted, he usurped the authority of the priest because only the priest could offer the
Okay.
censers, and he was doing that, and it wasn't his responsibility, only the priest, it says in the Bible.
Okay, so he usurped some authority. Listen to what he says. It's in verse, oh boy, I don't even have them listed anymore. It's in verse 3, okay. And they stood before them and said, this to Aaron and Moses, lift ye up yourselves above the congregation of the Lord. He's accusing Moses and Aaron of lifting themselves up out of the congregation, setting themselves apart. And we know that the Father set them apart. The Father picked Moses. The Father picked Aaron and set them apart for the jobs that they were doing. But here's Korah suggesting that they did it themselves. He's attributing something that God did to a human being. That sounds like he's blaspheming God. Because that's what blasphemy is. You attribute God's works to somebody other than God. So his first thing is blasphemy. He did some other things that were sinful, false, it's a false accusation, violating one of the commandments. But blasphemy, that sort of sealed his fate. He was going to die from that point on, because every sin except blasphemy is going to be forgiven. And this is an example of that. I think. That's Kroener's commentary. Another thought that ran through my mind. Verse 4. When Moses heard it, he fell on his face. And then he started speaking. He didn't get up off his face for quite a long time. In fact, he didn't get off his face until, where is it? Now we'll find it in a minute. Oh, verse 25. He was on his face from verse 4 through verse 25. And he started talking. I thought about that for a while. And Moses has fallen on his face several times in the past. One time he fell on his face, and it is, if you look at the Hebrew words, it's like water being poured on the ground. I mean, just, he's down. What was he doing? At that point in time, in all reality, he was worshiping the Father. Yeah. That time. What makes you think he's not worshiping the Father this time? Could it be that he's talking with the Father when he fell on his face, and the Father has told him something to say, how he's going to handle things? Now, you and I both know that the Father talked to Moses face to face like a man to a man. He didn't use dreams or visions. But when Moses fell on his face, he could be worshiping, and the Father could be talking to him privately so that nobody could hear it. And the Father is telling him what to say, because everything he says happens. When does a man say things, and everything he says happens? Only when he's speaking for God or through God, or God through him. So he's talking with the Father. The Father's talking with him. That brings up another question that struck me. I read the Bible. I don't read it as well as I should, but because I find something new every time I open the book. But here's a thought. Do we take into account, when we read the stories or the histories, who the Father is talking to and who else hears? Now at Mount Sinai, everybody heard the 10. But there are other things at Mount Sinai that was spoken strictly to Moses. Did anybody else hear it? Maybe not. In here, the Father talks to Moses. He talks to Moses and Aaron. He talks to Aaron. Did Moses know what he said to Aaron? Don't know. But it's possible that when we read this and the Father speaks, we assume that everybody hears what the Father says. I don't think that's true. I don't think Korah heard everything the Father said along the entire trip, because the Father wasn't talking to him. So he might not have known for sure that God picked Moses to be the leader and Aaron to be the high priest. Maybe he didn't know. So maybe some of the things he said are possibly true for him, but not for us, because we know what the Father said. So be careful who knows what's going on when we read the stories.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
For verse 27, where is Korah? It's only mentioned that Dathan and Abraham come out with their family, with their children. Where is Korah? And is this the reason why we see Korah's descendants in Psalms? So they have all the beautiful Psalms there. Is that the reason he still has descendants after this event?
Answer to that one, I believe, is this: that the people who stood in the doors of their tent were the ones that were consumed, were the ones that put in the pit. Who stood in the doors of the tent? Does it talk about Korah's family? No, just Korah. His wife was probably smarter than he was and kept the kids and the family away from the door. Now, if somebody stood in the door of those three people's tents, they were the ones that were consumed. So the wife of Dathan and Abiram and their children all were killed.
Yeah.
That brings another interesting. Did that answer your question?
Yes.
That brings another good question into my mind. It should to you too. Last week, Josh said that all of the 603,550 men who were 20 years or older died. And that's all that died. He specifically mentioned that the women did not die in that particular thing. And he was absolutely correct that under that circumstance, under that curse, if you want to call it that, or judgment, no women died. Howsoever, Miriam died. We don't know why. We don't know how. But she died. She didn't get to the promised land. Dathan and Abiram's wife and children too, died. They didn't get to the promised land, and they were not part of the 20 years or older. So we can't say for certain that no women were killed during the Exodus. But here are at least 3 that we know of for sure. So did some women die of natural causes during the Exodus? I don't know. But I can't say that no women, period, died. That's a falsehood, because at least 3 did. Okay, enough of that. I ask silly questions to myself when I read. Oh, I marked something else. Who has censers? Priests have censers. Is that today's knowledge, or is that knowledge from way back when?
It says right there in the Bible, I think we read that.
Way back when, the Bible says that 250 men had censers, because the word for censer and fire pan are the exact same word. Maybe they called the ones that the 250 men had fire pans, although sometimes they called it censers, is because priests in King James' time were the only one that had censers. The common man didn't. So in those days, Could it be that everybody had a censer?
For their fire in their home, in their tent. They had their a place for their fire, and that was the fire pan.
Thank you. That was great. I like that. They had fire pans. How do you think they carried fire from one camp to the next camp if they didn't have fire pans?
Yeah.
So,
But Korah took Aaron, and I'm sorry, jumping ahead, Aaron took fire off of the altar. They didn't take fire off the altar.
that's true. Now, let me ask you another question. What was Aaron's fire pan made of?
Bronze.
Pardon?
Bronze.
No.
Gold.
That fire pan that Aaron used was part of the furniture for the wilderness tabernacle. And everything in the wilderness tabernacle was either gold or silver in the two rooms. So Aaron's pan was gold. Everybody else's was brass. Because brass belongs to the common man. Okay, just another thought.
What about the verses 37 though?
Verse, what, 37?
Verse 37, it says that those censers are holy, right?
Because the fire from God came down and burned up the people. And the fire from God made the censers holy.
That's part of the answer. The other part of the answer was those 250 men were told to bring censers and bring them to the tent of meeting. So they were presented before the tent of meeting. So they were presented to God, then he burned them, then he sanctified them, if you will, by fire. Does that answer your question?
Okay, makes sense.
Hadn't thought of that one. Better mark that one. Okay.
Burl, I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
If I understood you correctly, you said that men 20 years and older were, or died in the wilderness.
In the wilderness.
In the wilderness. So that left a population of men who were quite young.
That was the population of men who were of military age when Moses took the first census after they left Egypt.
So,
they would be
so that was kind of like eliminating the process of procreation, or limiting it greatly. Why would he do that?
Well, that was the group.
What?
They died over 40 years.
They died over 40 years.
Yeah.
They died over 40 years.
Oh, okay.
That was the curse, if you will, for the 10 spies, quote unquote, coming back and bringing the wrong message, and the people, the children of Israel, going with the 10 rather than with Joshua and Caleb. And speaking of that, Joshua and Caleb were the only two, according to the Lord, that were not under the judgment of that particular time. They were the only two of the 603,550 that got into the promised land. That meant that both of them were over 20 years during the first census. That means that when they got to the promised land, they were at least 40 years old. They were the oldest men, maybe outside of some Levites, that crossed into Israel, the promised land. They were old men. Not quite as old as Moses, but they were old men, 40 years old.
Well, they had to have been older because they went into spies, so.
Yeah, they were 20
They
years.
had to have been at least 60, probably.
No, they were 20.
No, when they went to.
Because the father said all of those 20-year-old ones that were counted, except for Joshua and Caleb, their carcasses would lie in the desert.
So that's 20 years they were, 40 years in the desert. They were 60.
I'm sorry, I miscounted.
Yeah.
Thank you.
38 more years, so that'd be 58.
Yeah. So they were old men.
I be gentle with that.
Yeah. We're all.
Well, I think, I take a little liberty because I think I'm a relatively old man. Because I'm 87 years old.
You are.
Yep. So I think that I'm old. Now,
Yeah, really.
that is the first story. The second story I'd like to introduce, if I may. Oh, we got plenty of time. I'd like to introduce it this way. I'd like to introduce it with a question. This is chapter 17. My question for 17 is this. Why? No, I'm going to do this. Of the furniture that's in the wilderness tabernacle, the Holy of Holies and the holy place, and even in the courtyard if you won't go that far, how many of them were described twice as to how they were made? Now we know that back in Exodus, every one of them was identified and told how they were made. But there was one that was referred to a second time in, I forgot where. Oh, in Numbers. It was repeated as to how it was made. That was the menorah. And we understand the importance of the menorah, who it represents, and how it was made. But it was told twice. So my thought was, why was we told twice how it was made? So I went back to the first making and then the second making, and I looked at it, and a word struck me: almond.
Yeah.
Almond. And then last week, what did we hear? We heard about the tzitzits on the prayer shawls, and the tzitzit means seed. And what does a seed do? It grows and it blossoms, blooms, and turns into fruit. And we're supposed to be a little fruity when it comes to dealing with people, if you will. That's biblical fruit, not other kinds. We're supposed to be fruity. And then here we go. We're going to get some more almonds.
Yeah.
And God's going to use it as a sign of who He wants in charge of the Levitical system. In other words, the high priest and his sons. And that's chapter 17. So let's look at 17 and see what it says. Who would like to start off chapter 17? Yes, ma'am. How long did Aaron have his staff?
We had it in Egypt.
I have another question. Where did Moses' staff go? Didn't Aaron take Moses' staff at one point in time?
Wasn't that during the time when they throw the, when they were trying to, I guess you want to say, negotiate with Pharaoh to let the children of Israel go, and they threw their, Moshe threw his rod down, and of course, they're trying to do the same thing, copy it. The only difference was Moses' rod had turned into a snake, swallowed up the other snakes from the other.
Yeah, that was one time when Aaron picked it up.
Right.
There was another couple other times that Moses' rod was given to Aaron to accomplish some of the things. The lice, for one, and I've forgotten the other one right offhand. My question is, did that staff go back and forth between the two of them? Don't know for sure. But nowhere do I read where Aaron acquired a rod. But here we talk about Aaron's rod. Could very well have been Moses' rod.
It can be, because Moses used his rod to hit on the rock to have the water comes out later. So. they
Yes,
have-
that's true.
They each should have their own, right?
Th-
Now the Aaron's rod is in the tent.
Yeah, that's true. But when did Aaron acquire the rod? It doesn't say.
But the point is that it's a rod from each family or each tribe. And
Yes, absolutely. It's the rod from each tribe. What tribe was Moses?
Levi,
What tribe was Aaron?
Levi.
Could have been the same rod? Kroener's commentary, right or wrong? It was the same rod.
And so when you look at Psalm 23, and David is speaking, and he talks about your rod and your staff, they comfort me. He's speaking about authority and power, that the rod is power and the staff is authority. And so God's establishing authority
Yes.
with these rods.
And it's also the symbol of Aaron's being chosen. Now, if the people who had heard Korah a little bit, now everybody knows that God chose Aaron to be the high priest because of the budding of the rod, and the rod was an almond branch, if you will, going all the way back to the menorah and the fact that it deals with almonds. So it ties and says, this, God is essence saying, this is my sign that Aaron is to be the high priest, period. No ifs, ands, or buts. And where do they put it? They put it in front of the Ark of the Triumph. Been in France too often. The Ark of the Testimony, let's put it that way. And where's that? That's in the Holy of Holies. Who can go into the Holy of Holies? Only the high priest. Everybody else who would go in would die. Yes, ma'am.
So it's like a familial, like a head, like something that it's one for a specific family or for the family?
Yes.
Okay.
Each rod belonged to a particular family. It was their sign of, whoever held the rod was their sign of the authority over that family.
That would have been like the 12 tribes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's another thought about that. What two tribes didn't have a rod in there?
Levi.
Manasseh and Joseph.
Say that.
Ephraim and Manasseh.
They're under Joseph.
Joseph's family probably had a rod, but it doesn't say that Ephraim or Manasseh had a rod in there because there's only 12. And when you put Levi's rod in there, somebody has to drop out. So the rods were from the original 12 tribes. And Manasseh and had representation from the rod of Joseph. Okay.
There are some writers that, commenters, they believe that the almond tree was the tree of life in Gan Eden, and that this is a symbol of God's life through the intercessor, the priest. And we see that with Mashiach as being the priest according to the Melchizedek. So it's very symbolic of that intercession of life through the priest.
Okay, an interesting thought. I hadn't heard that one, but then I don't study that much, I don't think. Okay, now, the last chapter, chapter 18.
So the Lord said to Aaron, you and your son
Respond to the gifts of the children of Israel. And if that's the case, he has identified the gifts of the children of Israel through the sacrificial system. And he's sort of telling the children of Israel what those gifts should be, and they should be the best. Also, the Levites, in their actions with respect to the sacrifices and their portion thereof, are supposed to honor the children of Israel by doing it appropriately and not messing around with it. Let's see. How do I want to talk about that? You remember a gentleman by the name of Eli. That was a high priest during Samson's time. Samuel's time. Sorry. It's Samuel's time. About his children, how they used to rob the tithe and rob the sacrifices. And it turns out that Samuel's sons weren't much better. They did the same thing. But if somebody gives you something, you need to honor them by how you accept it and how you use it. It does not do well for somebody to give you something and then you throw it in a drawer and you never take it out again until you sell the house. And I've seen people do that. And here the Levites are cautioned, honor the people who support you. Because in some respects, they don't have any choice. If they want their sins forgiven, they've got to provide the appropriate sacrifice, or I'm sorry, the appropriate gift, if you actually is what it is. So it's a two-edged sword. It's for the children of Israel and it's for the Levites. And making sure that they don't argue between themselves over how things are going, to keep peace and tranquility and honor and love. And maybe it's sort of a statement to us about how we keep peace and tranquility at times, on how we honor people who want to bless us in one manner or another. Does that make sense?
So can we gather through this that that's the reason why they were, Korah was upset over this situation? Like, what was given to the Levite, the priest, Aaron, the priest?
Well, the priests, the Levites also benefited in that system.
Yes, but
Because the stuff was, this is why I say that. The Israelites gave things to the Levites. Levites gave 1/10 of it to the priests. The priest gave stuff to the Levites and everybody that was in their family or in their area. So there was gifts going back and forth all the time. And there was supposed to be no, what's a good word? No keeping, pardon?
Animosity between.
Animosity, and there's no, I want this because it's a better piece of meat than what you get.
But it seems like that was the reason why, because when they talk about Korah in this situation, it doesn't really say what Korah was upset about.
Oh.
Then after they, God begins to clarify how this is supposed to work. Because it seems like that was the reason. To me, that's what I get.
It was because
No.
their censers, their fire plates, they wanted to worship God by lighting their incense in there, but God
Right.
wanted either Moses or Aaron.
Probably because they wanted the portions of the priest. That's what I
Yeah,
get.
but Moses wasn't a priest, and he was allowed to light his incense, right?
Okay, let me say this about
It
Korah.
wasn't because of the censors, I think it was because of because they said, we don't wanna be like your slaves, you know? And then God is saying, hey, this is the way, this is what they're gonna get, this is what the priests are gonna get, this is what the Levites are gonna get. And I think that's part of what.
Let's go back to another ilk on this, if you may. Korah and his group, the group that he was in, their responsibility with respect to the wilderness tabernacle was to carry the holy furniture that was inside the wilderness tabernacle. They carried it on their backs. They weren't even allowed to see it or come near it. Otherwise they would die. All they had to do was carry it. Now, the other two groups of Levites that had things to do with the wilderness tabernacle, they got carts and cattle and oxen. So they would load the carts and the oxen would move it back and forth. Whereas Korah and his group had to carry it by hand. That made him sort of a slave, if you will. That could upset somebody. Remember David? Well, I can't go there because it's...
The material point, though, is that Korah, he was, we look at him from a surface point of view as a wicked man. He did say and do some wicked things, but we all do those kind of things. He was a man he was a cousin of Moses and Aaron, and he felt that he had just as much reason to be the high priest as anyone else. And like Burl mentioned earlier about he didn't hear everything that God said. But the main point, though, is the line of authority. God establishes a line of authority, and he wasn't accepting that.
And also with respect to that, he was one of the older sons, and he was not chosen to be the head of the family at that point in time. Somebody else was. So his authority, he was overlooked by somebody, and somebody else who younger than him was assigned the authority of the family, the father of the family. He was overlooked. He wasn't worthy of it. Otherwise, he would have gotten it. That had to stick in his craw a little bit, too.
And then he was speaking to all these people, sedition, essentially. He was speaking rebellion, and God says rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft. So it just wasn't going to end well for him. Abiram and his brother, the sages say that they were the two that were quarreling back in Egypt. That Moses tried to calm them down, and they've been a thorn in Moses' side ever since then. It's a different issue, but
Yeah.
they were from Reuben's tribe, and Reuben, like what
Reuben.
was just talking about, Reuben was slighted by his father because of what he had done with his one concubine, and so those kinds of resentments just they stick in people's craws, and they can last for a long, long time.
Yeah.
We have to be careful about it ourselves.
William, will you do me a favor?
Teach the next one?
No, I wasn't going to say that. Would you close us today, please, William?